Have you seen a massive increase in your energy bills operating your home studio? I can tell you, I have, and I haven't even got the studio up and running. So you're probably sitting there thinking, what's this musician idiot talking about how to stem the cost of energy? And you might be right. Do I know what I'm talking about? Do I not know what I'm talking about? But I may have some ideas. There are actually some simple steps that you can take to save you a bob or two. And for those of my viewers who are not based in the UK, I should say that a bob is an English term for a coin that was known as a shilling, and it was known as its alternative name was a bob. It equates to about five new pence in the sterling currency. And if you were in the Scout movement many years ago, there was a thing called bob a job. So effectively, you paid the cub or the scout who was doing the job for you 5 pence or a shilling to do a job for you, and that could be walk the dog, wash the car, whatever it happened to be, and it was a way of raising funds. So if you hear the term bob a job or saving a bob or two, so bob a job was the Scout movement, how they raised funds, and a bob or two was saving 5 pence or more. Interesting side, but let's get on to the really interesting stuff. Remember, like, comment, subscribe to the channel. Go over to Instagram and follow me there. Go over to Facebook, follow me there. That's where the normal notices are. And consider becoming a Patreon. Okay, let's turn to the obvious one. This thing. Okay, probably like me, many of you are using computers for your musical journey. And some computers, especially older ones, that you've loaded up with input and output cards, can actually consume a fair amount of power. You'd probably be very surprised actually how much energy a computer will take. So a very, very simple one is, if you're not using it, switch it off. It's not so prevalent to if you're running on batteries, because obviously, you know, if you shut the machine down or you close the lid, it goes into hibernation mode anyway. But if you're talking about an old style tower PC that many of us are still running because you need the horsepower, and many of us don't switch their machines off. Well, many of us used to not switch their machines off, shall we say. And this thing just will burn through energy at a rate of knots. Typically in some of these machines, some of these tower machines, some of these older machines, you've got a 300, 400 or 500 watts power supply. Okay, that's burning energy every hour of the day while it's switched on. So switch it off. And you wouldn't be alone, because having canvassed a number of my friends on this kind of subject, some of them actually stated that they never ever switch their computer off, or computers, maybe plural, because they have different computers that perform different functions in their home studio or semi-pro studio, which is what some of my friends are actually running. So these things run 24/7. And one of my friends actually did the experiment a few weeks ago. He's got an energy monitor fitted, and he actually went and switched his computers off before he went home, and then switched them back on again in the morning when he needed to start working with them again. Or if he didn't need to work with them, he didn't switch them on. And he actually, over the course of a month, saw a significant decrease in the amount of energy that he was using, purely because he wasn't running these things 24/7. So, you know, believe me, there is energy to be saved. And where we are at the moment, especially if you live in England, you know, where energy bills are just going through the roof, it's an easy way to save money. Also, remember to switch your monitors off as well, because it's all well and good switching the computer off, But if you don't switch the monitor off, the monitor goes into standby and will consume power in the background. Or even worse, an older style monitor will just sit there, powered on, consuming power, but because it's got no input, it looks like it's off. So anyway, the first thing to look at if you're trying to save a bob or two is to look at your computer. Okay, obviously I'm into keyboards, so this is probably going to be keyboard focused, but any other equipment, and I'll come on to that in a minute. But if you've got synths and keyboards and sound modules in your studio, probably the thing I would say is, when was the last time you switched them off? Now, it's an interesting thing with synths, because if you have synths that effectively have, I don't know, some sort of, oops, that's useful, isn't it? Some sort of power supply like that with a low voltage cable that goes into the back of the synth. If they're plugged into the wall, even though you've switched the synth off, they're still consuming some power. I got into the habit a long time ago of just switching them off, either at the wall or at the conditioning unit, because I have a conditioning unit, UPSs and conditioning units. So I tend to switch them off there. Otherwise, they do consume power. You'll be surprised actually how much power these things consume when they're plugged into the wall, but the actual end device is actually switched off. Because the way that around the world, I think most countries are AC, which is alternating current. And basically what that does is that flops from positive to negative 50 or 60 times per second, which is called 50 or 60 hertz. You see quite often written on the back of a synthesizer or one of these power supplies. And if there's a transformer in there, and that transformer is going positive to negative, it will lose some energy through heat. And basically that energy is energy you're paying for. So again, I've got into the habit of where I, even though the synth is switched off at the back of the synth on one of these sort of low voltage supplies, I many years ago got into the habit of switching off the actual plug as well, or the conditioning unit, so that it wasn't taking any power in. Now, if you're talking about a synth that actually takes a IC in, and when I'm talking about ICs, what I'm talking about is one of these things, okay? So a 3-pinned or a 2-pinned connector that goes into the back of the synth, then typically in those synths, the on-off switch will switch the power off before it gets to the transformer or the power board. So effectively, when that is off, the power board is dead. But in some of the older machines, where they were definitely having a debate and maybe smoking something when they designed the circuit board, and I have actually seen this in one synth, I can't remember which one it was, but I've actually seen this in one synth many years ago, where the power came in and the transformer was still hot, and the on-off switch was after the transformer. Don't ask me why, but I have seen it. So again, best policy is, if it's switched off at the back of the synth, I also switch it off at the wall or the power conditioning unit. But that's just me. But in most cases, with a synth where you have power going, the mains power going into the synth, switching it off at the back of the synth will switch the power off to the transformer. And it's the transformer that is your issue. Now, you do have to be careful with some of the more modern synths, because typically the more modern synths have features such as auto power down. Okay, and what auto power down does is it puts the synth into a state of hibernation, and the synth is not really off in some instances. It's in hibernation, and when you press a button on the synth, it comes back to life, so it senses that something is going on. If you have synths like that, and you've let it go power off through this auto hibernation type feature, then you really do need to actually switch it physically off. So just be mindful of that. But again, switching these things off will save you money, and you know that's the point of this rant. The next one is always a contentious area, and this is amplifiers, speakers and mixers. Why do I say it's contentious? Because most people forget to switch them off. In fact, again, talking to the same person I was talking to about the computer, he actually said that he can't remember the last time he actually switched his amplifier off, the amplifier that runs the studio monitors. And then he went, actually, do I have an amplifier running my studio monitors? And in one instance, yes, he does. And in another instance, no, he doesn't. And I'll explain what I mean by that. So in one instance, what he has is he has two studio monitors that are not independently powered. What do I mean by that? Each monitor is effectively dead. It has a audio cable going in the back that drives the speakers. But the amplifier actually does the amplification of the signal from the mixer to a level that can drive the speakers. The other style is the monitors that I have, like the Rocket 5s and 6s that I use, where each one of those monitors actually has its own transformer in it. You put mains power in, and then you take your signal straight off the mixer into the back of those. They're the monitors I have. They have their own transformer. They also have a hibernation mode, which means that they look like they're off, but they're actually not off. They're in hibernation, which means that there's power in them, and it's humming away, waiting for it to sense an audio signal, and then it switches them back off. And you know, guilty as many other people are, I used to leave mine on all the time, and when I sat down to play something, as soon as I started playing, the speakers would come back on, or whatever I was doing in the studio. So there are two types, and as I say, my friend of mine has both of these, and he said he can't remember the last time he actually switched them off. But again, he has been switching them off and has noticed changes in his energy consumption. Not a great deal. Computer was the biggest one, but all these other things, he's noticed that his energy consumption is going down. So the bottom line with this sort of stuff is switch it off. Now, I know things like amplifiers, speakers, etc. are quite often hard to get to because you position them where you want them, but you can't readily get your hand round to the back of them. So my advice is always to try and A, try to make them accessible, but B, have some sort of dead switch, which will allow you to switch all that sort of stuff off very easily if you can't easily get to them. So amplifiers typically buried in a rack, hidden somewhere. I know my friend, when he was talking about it, it wasn't in the rack anywhere near his workspace. It was actually in a rack that was over there, if you like, because it didn't need to be here, because he runs the amplifiers at a constant gain. Anyway, if you're looking at things that are ancillary units, things like effect units, MIDI devices, USB devices, these things typically will have some sort of external transformer, whether it be a USB plug, and I don't have any USB plugs here in the workshop, principally because if you notice here, I've got USB jacks on my plug sockets now, so I don't tend to bring USB transformers in here because they're built into the wall. But what I do here is unplug them when I'm not using them, so that any device that's sitting on the end of them typically is not drawing any power. But it's also a good idea with these little transformers just to pull them out of the wall. So there you go. So what's the summary? In short, switch it off. The way I designed my studio when I was working, effectively I had 8 sockets with certain things running off each socket, and I could get to all 8 sockets relatively easy. And when I'd finished doing what I was doing, I used to just go clonk, 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 clonk 8 times, and I knew that everything in the studio was completely dead. But that was the way I did it. And also, I had, the reason why it was eight sockets, if you like, was because I then had power conditioning units and UPSs that came off those 8 sockets, power conditioning units that went to the effect modules effectively, and UPSs for the more computerized synthesizers, where a sudden spike or loss of power could actually damage the synthesizer itself, because it could actually damage the computerized components. So UPSs and power conditioners are the way to go if you've got the money. But if you don't have the money, leaving this stuff off actually will protect you from things like voltage spikes and stuff like that. Because if you leave them on and the power can get to the device, if you have a voltage spike, it will actually go and fry the circuitry of the machine, even though it's not being used, but it's on and it's connected. Anyway, so from my perspective, when I had my studio up and running, it was 8 switches and everything was dead. And I wasn't really monitoring usage at the time in terms of power. But if you look back at what I was doing, I did notice a considerable increase in power if I left stuff on overnight. So if I was doing something, or I was letting something process, quite often I would leave the power on, and you would be surprised how much power certain things consume. So I used to have a NAS that ran 24/7 and a computer that ran 24/7, and when I switched that stuff off, all of a sudden I saw a real term drop in the amount of power that I was using. But you know, don't believe me, but I am telling you now, if you switch everything in your studio off when you are not using it, you will save money, because you will lose less or use less power. And I apologise for my voice. I have been losing my voice steadily for the last week. I'm trying to get a load of recording done today, and probably by the end of it I will have no voice left. Anyway, for now, live long and prosper, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.